The galaxy had rules, ancient, unbreakable laws forged in the fires of 1,000 extinct civilizations. The most sacred was the prohibition of orbital bombardment upon a soft-inhabited world. It was the line in the cosmic sand, the one act that transformed warfare into genocide, that made conquerors into universal pariahs. When the Tkar hegemony, in their brutal conquest of the human colony of Persephone's garden, glassed 3 cities from orbit to shatter planetary resistance, they knew the law. They simply did not care. They calculated the Galactic Council would issue sanctions, levy fines, engage in decades of tedious diplomacy. They believed humanity, a species so new to the stars they still smelled of their own cradle soil, would weep, protest, and ultimately submit. They were correct about the Council. They were catastrophically, existentially wrong about humanity. For the Council convened not to judge the Tkar, but to desperately try and stop the humans from breaking the very universe in their quest for a justice the cosmos had no name for. This is not the story of how humanity sought the galaxy's justice. This is the story of how the galaxy learned to fear humanity's wrath. The Chamber of the Galactic Council was a monument to serene, timeless power. A vast, silent amphitheater of gleaming neutral metals and soft, bioluminescent light, where representatives of 100 species floated in their respective environmental fields, their thoughts and translated words weaving a tapestry of ponderous diplomacy. The air hummed with the subtle frequencies of ancient accords and unspoken understandings. Today, however, the serene hum had a frantic, discordant edge. On the central display sphere, a replay unfolded in grim silence. The sleek, predatory silhouettes of Tkar hegemony orbital platforms, the blinding lances of plasma descending through Persephone's garden's atmosphere, the silent, expanding circles of incandescent death where the cities of New Athens, Kyoto's Bloom, and Hope's Landing had been. The feed cut to the hegemony's justification, a stark, scaled visage speaking of strategic recalibration and regrettable but necessary expediency. The Tkar ambassador, a hulking, reptilian figure named Vrax, shifted in his fluid suspension tank, his voice a gravelly buzz in the universal translator. The matter is concluded. The Persephone system is now a protectorate of the hegemony. The loss of life is unfortunate, but the instability posed by human insurgents required a definitive resolution. We await the Council's recommendations for reparation payments to the human governing body. A wave of displeasure, a subtle shift in light patterns and chemical pheromones washed through the chamber. The Aloran diplomat, willowy and silver-skinned, spoke with melodic disapproval. This is a clear violation of the Orion Accords. Article 1. Orbital bombardment on this scale is an abomination. The hegemony must submit to a tribunal. Vrax emitted a low, gurgling sound akin to laughter. A tribunal. It will be convened. It will debate for standard cycles. Findings will be published. The hegemony will consider them with all due gravity. The condescension was palpable. This was the script, the dance of outrage and delayed consequence. It was then the human delegate spoke. Ambassador Kaido Singh had been a statue of stillness throughout the proceedings. A man in his late 60s, his face a map of quiet intensity, not of rage, but of a profound, unsettling focus. He did not activate his console's flashing rebuttal light. He simply stood from his simple, unadorned chair, a stark contrast to the environmental pods and anti-grav cushions of the others. Ambassador Vrax, Singh's voice was calm, quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent chamber. The United Soul Federation has received your explanation, and the Council has my people's position on it. He tapped a single command into his wristpad. The central sphere blinked, and the horrific images of Persephone were replaced by a simple, tactical star map of the Tkar hegemony border regions. Dozens of new, blinking red icons appeared along its length. The following is a list of 17 Tkar military outposts, listening stations, and supply depots located in neutral or unclaimed space, as per Council cartography. Singh's voice remained flat, even monotone. 37 minutes ago, at 1400 hours Terran Standard Time, these installations ceased transmitting. Simultaneously, deep-range observatories have detected thermonuclear detonations at each location. Yield signatures match Terran-designed strategic warheads. There were no survivors. The silence that followed was no longer serene. It was a physical void, a vacuum of utter disbelief. Vrax's frills flared violently. You dare! This is an act of war. Council, you see, they are savages. Singh continued as if he hadn't heard. This is not an act of war, Ambassador. This is a police action. You murdered 12 million civilians. You did not wage war on our soldiers. You massacred our children, our poets, our gardeners. The Federation has therefore declared the Tar Hegemony military a terrorist organization. As such, its assets wherever found are subject to immediate and permanent disarmament. The chamber erupted. Lights flashed, alien cries of shock and anger filled the air. The Aloran slammed a delicate hand on her console. Ambassador Singh, you cannot unilaterally. This violates a dozen interstellar conventions. You have attacked sovereign territory. Singh turned his cool gaze upon her. Sovereign territory? Those installations, by your own maps, were in unclaimed space. Illegally placed. We have merely cleaned up a galactic nuisance. As for conventions, he said, his eyes locking back on Vrax, who was now hissing commands into a comm link. The Tkar voided all conventions when they glassed our cities. They introduced a new paradigm. We are simply adhering to it. But your targets, the loss of life, sputtered the Glevet delegate, a gelatinous mass pulsating with distress. Minimal, Singh stated. The strike for time for shift change cycles when personnel were at minimal levels. We target machines, not cooks and clerks. A distinction, it seems, the hegemony fails to grasp. The unspoken comparison hung in the air, brutal and clear. Humanity had just obliterated 17 hardened military targets, and had likely killed fewer beings than the car had in a single minute over New Athens. Vrax was apoplectic. Your pathetic fleet will be space dust. The hegemony armada will burn your worlds to cinders. For the first time, a faint, cold smile touched Singh's lips. It was a smile that chilled the blood of every diplomat who saw it. We welcome the attempt. In fact, we are counting on it. The message is sent, Council. The United Sol Federation is now at war with the Tar Hegemony military. Any political or economic dealings with that military entity will be considered material support for terrorism. The time for your talk is over. Ours has just begun. He gave a small, formal nod and left the podium, walking with steady, measured steps out of the cacophonous chamber. Behind him, the pristine order of a million-year-old galactic order was shattered, not by a declaration, but by a simple, horrifying demonstration. Humanity hadn't asked for permission. They hadn't demanded justice. They had simply, efficiently, and with terrifying precision, begun to exact it. The shockwaves from the council chamber radiated out at light speed, but humanity's wrath moved faster. Across the spiral arm, the Tar Hegemony mobilized. News feeds showed glorious armadas gathering, the predatory, organic-looking hegemony warships flowing like iron spores into nodal points. The narrative was one of righteous retaliation against an upstart, irrational species. The council pleaded for calm, emergency sessions running continuously, their transmissions a blur of frantic diplomacy that echoed uselessly in the dark between stars. The first real battle was not where anyone expected. The hegemony, predictably, amassed its third fleet to strike at the human trade outpost of Sentinel Station, a hub in a system bordering their space. It was an obvious, brutal fist aimed at a strategic and symbolic target. The third fleet, 200 vessels strong, descended upon the system, their commanders anticipating a swift slaughter of the station's paltry dozen defensive corvettes. They found Sentinel Station empty, a silent, power-down shell. And floating in a loose cloud between the fleet and the station were 107 human ships. Not warships. Not the sleek, gun-studded cruisers the galaxy expected. They were freighters, bulk haulers, colony tugs, retrofitted mining barges. A absurd, ragtag flotilla that looked like a cosmic junkyard. Admiral Cracks, aboard the hegemony dreadnought Worldbiter, scoffed. A bluff. A pathetic sacrifice. Evaporate them. The hegemony fleet opened fire. Lances of plasma and kinetic slugs tore towards the motionless human vessels. And then the impossible happened. The human ships began to move. Not with the graceful, thrust-vectored maneuvers of warships, but with violent, jerking, utterly unpredictable bursts. They weren't dodging. They were stumbling out of the way, their inertial dampeners clearly overwhelmed, hulls groaning from the brutal acceleration. Yet they were moving faster than any ship of that mass, and design had a right to. They've overclocked their engines to the point of meltdown, a car sensor officer hissed. They're flying coffins. The human fleet scattered like metallic insects, each on a crazed, suicidal vector. And then they started firing back. Not with anti-ship lasers or plasma batteries. They fired mining lasers, cutting beams used for slicing asteroids. They fired mass drivers designed to hurl, or they fired canisters of supercooled gas used for fuel processing that flash-froze sections of hegemony hull plating, making them brittle. It was absurd, humiliating, and terrifyingly effective in its chaos. A hegemony cruiser, distracted by 3 tugs harrying it with industrial-grade laser welders, failed to notice the massive, unpowered colony habitation module drifting towards it on a ballistic course until it was too late. The module, made to withstand meteor strikes, plowed through the cruiser's shields by sheer mass and velocity, tearing its spine out. They are not fighting. They are demolishing. Cracks roared. Focus fire. Destroy them. But focusing was impossible. The human vessels were everywhere and nowhere. Their comm channels a riot of uncoded, chaotic traffic, panicked yells, raw laughter, the screaming of overstressed engines. It was not the sterile silence of a naval engagement. It was the din of a bar brawl in a zero-gravity shipyard. Then, the dreadnought Worldbiter shuddered. A massive, spindly mining barge, its engines a continuous explosion of white-hot plasma, had rammed itself directly into the dreadnought's primary shield projector array, sacrificing itself to create a localized collapse. In that momentary gap, a swarm of modified missile shuttles, formerly used for planetary supply drops, detonated. They didn't carry antimatter warheads. They carried 10,000-ton slabs of raw nickel iron, accelerated to a fraction of light speed by their suicide burn. Kinetic kill vehicles. The galaxy had banned them as indiscriminate. Humanity, it seemed, had a surplus of asteroids and a lack of concern for bans. The Worldbiter's hull screamed as it was pummeled by pure, stupid mass. Internal explosions rippled down its length. On the bridge, Admiral Cracks watched in stupefied horror as his majestic fleet was being dismantled not by a superior force, but by a swarm of insane, improvised weapons wielded by what appeared to be mad engineers and lunatic freight pilots. The battle, which the car had planned as a 30-minute victory parade, lasted for 6 hours of pure, unadulterated carnage. When the last human ship, a shot-up fuel tanker that detonated in a final, glorious fireball that took 2 hegemony frigates with it, finally died, the Third Fleet was a broken, bleeding thing. Over half its ships were destroyed or crippled. The humans had lost every single vessel they had brought to the field. But they had one. Sentinel Station stood untouched. The car advance was halted. Back on the Council world, the delegates watched the battle records in stunned, revolted silence. The Aloran diplomat whispered, "They sent civilians. They sent their workers to die." A new human liaison, a stern-faced woman named Commander Vance, had replaced Singh. She shook her head. Those workers were all volunteers from the Persephone's Garden Survivor Registry. The pilots, the engineers. They were the husbands, wives, siblings, and children of the dead. We didn't send them. They demanded to go. We just gave them the tools. She leaned forward, her eyes hard. You see savagery. We see a principle. You have rules for war, a clean, surgical thing. The car broke that compact. So there are no rules anymore. There is only cost. And we will make the cost of hurting us so astronomically, unbearably high that the very idea will become unthinkable. That flotilla was the first installment. The galaxy began to understand. Humanity's wrath was not a singular, explosive event. It was a glacier. It was the cold, grinding, relentless application of will, fueled by a grief that did not fade, but calcified into purpose. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to teach a lesson so terrible it would echo for eternity. And the lesson of Sentinel Station was simple. You will run out of warships long before we run out of freighters. The Tkar hegemony, reeling from a humiliation at Sentinel Station, shifted strategy. No more direct, costly assaults. Their high command, in a move they considered brilliantly subtle, initiated a stealth campaign. They targeted humanity's soft underbelly, its nascent interstellar economy, and its fragile diplomatic ties. Covert operations were launched to sabotage human trade lanes. Cargo ships vanished in dark space. Automated mining outposts on asteroids went silent. Propaganda streams, expertly forged, were leaked to neutral species, depicting humanity as unstable, genocidal monsters who use civilian volunteers as cannon fodder. The goal was to isolate Sol, to strangle it slowly, to make the galaxy see humans as the true threat. The Council, increasingly panicked by the escalating Shadow War, convened a secret tribunal. This time, they summoned not the human ambassador, but a figure whose name had begun to circulate in fearful whispers. General Alistair Thorne, the architect of Sentinel and the newly appointed head of the Sol Federation's off-world strategic command. They expected a brute, a militaristic thug. Thorne, when he arrived, was a man of quiet intensity in a simple uniform devoid of adornment. He listened as the Aloran, the Glevet, and others laid out their evidence of Tkar covert ops and their concerns about human escalation. General Thorne, the Aloran concluded, her voice laced with diplomatic acid. Your actions, however motivated, are destabilizing the entire galactic arm. This campaign of vengeance must end. We have prepared a framework for a ceasefire and reparations. The Car have indicated a willingness to negotiate. Thorne steepled his fingers. Negotiate. After Persephone. It wasn't a question. It was a flat statement of absurdity. Tell me, esteemed council, what is the hegemony's most critical, non-replicable resource? The cornerstone of their technology, their energy, their entire civilization. The delegates shifted, confused. The Glevet pulsed. That is not relevant to... It is the only relevant question, Thorne interrupted, his voice still calm. For the Car, it is zero-point energy crystals, mined only in the gravity wells of their home system's gas giant, Vrax's Fury, refined in a single orbital facility, the forge of creation. Every hegemony warship, every major city, runs on ZP cores from that facility. A cold dread began to seep into the chamber. The Tar ambassador, present via hologram, went very still. What is your point, General? The Aloran asked, her voice tight. My point is one of proportionality. Thorne tapped his wristpad. The central display lit up not with a star map, but with a simple, clean schematic of the Forge of Creation. The Tkar destroyed 3 of our cities. We have, to date, destroyed military outposts. The exchange is not equivalent. We have been imprecise. He zoomed in on the schematic. The Forge is a marvel. It employs 30 million Tkar, of which perhaps 5% are military personnel. The rest are scientists, engineers, technicians, custodians, cooks. Families live there. It is, for all intents and purposes, a city that powers a genocidal regime. The holographic Vrax found his voice. You would not dare. The Council would unite against you. It would be an atrocity 1,000 times worse than Persephone. Thorn looked at the car hologram, and for the first time, his calm facade cracked, revealing the icy fury beneath. Atrocity? You speak to me of atrocity? You, who turned living cities into glass. He took a controlled breath. But you are correct. Orbital bombardment of civilian habitat is an unspeakable crime. It is the line that cannot be crossed. He stood up, so we will not cross it. He changed the display. Now it showed a different schematic. A human vessel, sleek and new, unlike anything seen before. It had no obvious weapons. Instead, it had a massive, forward-facing array of intricate machinery. This is the SS proportional response, Thorne said. It does not carry bombs. It carries a custom-built, high-yield tachyon pulse projector, a modified version of our interstellar communications technology. In 6 hours, it will arrive at the Forge of Creation. It will not fire a single shot at the station. It will, however, broadcast a single, focused pulse directly into the gas giant below it. Vrax's fury. The science officers in the room gasped. The Aloran's silver skin paled. A tachyon pulse of that magnitude into an active gas giant. It would trigger a cascading instability in the planetary core. It would ignite the atmosphere. Thorne nodded, creating a short-lived, low-grade stellar ignition. A new, temporary star. The radiation and EMP will be spectacular, but largely harmless to shielded structures at orbital distance. However, the gravitational eddies and massive thermal bloom will render the Forge's mining operations impossible for approximately 200 standard years. The facility will be intact. Every single tar on it will be alive. But the crystals they need to power their civilization, to build their warships, to light their cities, will be utterly beyond their reach. Their society will be forced into a pre-technological energy austerity within a decade. The silence was absolute. It was a punishment so meticulously crafted, so chillingly precise, it froze the blood. It wasn't destruction. It was a turning off of the lights. Forever. This is monstrous, Vrax screeched. It is a death sentence for my species. No, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the dead quiet chamber. It is a life sentence. You will live. You will remember. You will have generations to contemplate in the growing cold and dark the precise cost of glassing a human city. You introduced a new paradigm, Ambassador. We are following it to its logical conclusion. We are not destroying your city. We are just ensuring that no one in that city can ever flip a switch again. The message is simple. Touch our homes, and we will not destroy yours. We will simply unplug them, and let the long night teach you what you have done. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at the horrified council. You wanted us to stop. We will. After this, the war ends when the Forge goes dark. Not by your negotiations, by our calculus. The math is now very, very clear. As Thorne exited, the galaxy finally saw the true face of human wrath. It was not blind rage. It was not chaotic violence. It was a cold, patient, surgical intellect, capable of devising a punishment so exquisite in its cruelty, so absolute in its justice, that it made mere annihilation seem merciful. That Carr had broken a world. Humanity would break a future. The 6-hour countdown was a psionic scream across the galaxy. The Tkar hegemony threw every remaining warship in a desperate, suicidal cordon around Vrax's fury and the Forge of Creation. Panic bled through their comm networks, a raw, biological fear the universe had never heard from the proud reptilians before. The Galactic Council issued frantic, useless pleas for a stay of execution. Neutral species watched their censors with a kind of morbid, horrified fascination. This was no longer war. It was an appointment with a fate meticulously scheduled. On the bridge of the proportional response, Captain Anya Sharma monitored the approaching armada. Her crew was silent, focused. There were no cheers, no bloodlust. The schematic of the Forge, with its population counter ticking over 30 million, was displayed prominently. It was a constant, grim reminder. All car channels are offering surrender, her comms officer reported, voice strained. Unconditional. They are begging. Sharma's face was granite. Persephone's garden never got the chance to surrender. Record and archive all please. They are evidence for history. Maintain course. The car fleet opened fire at maximum range. A storm of plasma and kinetics filled space. The proportional response did not evade. It did not return fire. Its shields flared, soaking up the punishment as it continued its unswerving, implacable advance. It was a ship on a rail, absorbing a universe of hate to deliver a single, specific point. Aboard the Forge of Creation, chaos reigned. Evacuation was impossible. There were not enough ships. Families huddled in sealed sectors, watching external feeds as the human vessel, a dark arrowhead wreathed in the fire of its own shielding, grew larger. The car on the station weren't facing warriors. They were facing an equation. And they were the variable about to be canceled out. "They're through the cordon," someone yelled on the proportional response bridge as a wing of hegemony interceptors vaporized against their shields. The gas giant Vrax's fury now filled the viewport, a colossal, swirling marble of violent oranges and reds. Entering firing position. Tachyon array at 100%. Gravimetric anchors stable. The weapons officer's voice was clinical. Captain Sharma took a final look at the data stream from the forge. Life signs, internal communications full of terror. She thought of New Athens, of the silent glass plains that were once parks and schools. She opened a fleet-wide channel, her voice echoing across every human vessel within range, and she knew, being intercepted by the entire galaxy. "This is Captain Sharma of the proportional response. To the beings on the Forge of Creation, you will feel a tremor. You will see a light, and then you will live. Remember why. For the 12 million who cannot." She nodded. Fire. There was no blinding lance of energy. No cataclysmic explosión. The array glowed with an impossible, silent light, and a ripple went out, not through space, but underneath it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Vrax's fury winked. Deep within its churning heart, a chain reaction of exotic particles, triggered by the tachyon pulse, began. The gas giant's frenetic swirling slowed, coalesced, and then its entire atmosphere, from pole to pole, ignited in a wave of fusion fire. It transformed from a planet into a small, furious star, its light washing over the forge, bleaching its metallic hull white, casting stark, long shadows. On the forge, alarms blared, not damage alerts, but system failure warnings. The delicate, moon-sized machinery that reached into the newborn star's photosphere to draw out zero-point energy went dead, then began to melt. The power grid of the station flickered, and then switched to emergency reserves. Across the hegemony worlds, 1 billion lights dimmed. 1,000 warships in dry dock went permanently dark. The proportional response, its mission complete, turned gracefully and began its journey home, leaving the stunned, silent car fleet floating in the eerie, new light of their own mortality. The Galactic Council chamber, weeks later, was a tomb. The human seat was occupied once more by Ambassador Kaido Singh. He looked older, the weight of a star's fire in his eyes. The car delegation was new, smaller, subdued. Their scales were dull. Ambassador Vrax was gone, likely a victim of the internal collapse that was already ravaging his energy-starved civilization. The Aloran diplomat spoke, her voice devoid of its former melodic certainty, now just a hollow echo. The hegemony has formally surrendered. All claims on human territories are rescinded. Reparations will be discussed, though their capacity to provide them is now limited. She couldn't even look at the car. The sight of a great power reduced to a pre-industrial fate by a single, surgical strike was too horrific to comprehend. Singh placed a simple data crystal on the console before him. The United Sol Federation accepts the surrender. We have no interest in governing car space. We have no interest in further military engagement, provided all hostilities cease. This crystal contains schematics for low-yield solar collectors and geothermal tap technology, compatible with tar biology and basic metallurgy. It is enough to keep your people from freezing in the dark. A humanitarian gesture. The gasp in the chamber was universal. The beings who had just extinguished a civilization's future were offering it a candle. The new Tar ambassador, an elderly scholar with trembling frills, stared, uncomprehending. Why? After what you have done, why offer us this? Singh looked at him, and for a moment the unyielding ice in his gaze thawed, revealing an ocean of bottomless, weary sorrow. Because we're not the car, he said, the words simple, devastating. What we did of Rax's fury was not done out of hatred for your people. It was done out of love for ours. It was a lesson written in fire and darkness so that no species, anywhere, ever again will believe that murdering our children is a calculable risk. You have been condemned to remember. We are condemned to be the ones who pass the sentence. That is burden enough for eternity. We do not need your corpses to add to it. He stood, gathering his things. The war is over. The lesson, however, is permanent. Let the galaxy understand, humanity will build and trade and laugh and explore. We will extend the hand of friendship to all, but cross that one single line, and we will become the precise, unforgiving instrument of consequence you force us to be. We would prefer to be your neighbors. Do not make us become your judges. He left the chamber. Behind him, the silence was no longer of shock or fear, but of a deep, primal understanding. The Galactic Council had been stunned by Earth's wrath, but they were utterly humbled by its mercy. They had witnessed a species that could wield the power of a god to curse a foe, and then step down from the heavens to offer them a blanket against the cold they had created. It was the most terrifying and the most hopeful thing the universe had ever seen. Humanity was not the monster they had feared. They were something infinitely more complex. They were the guardians of a line, and the price of crossing it was written not just in fire, but in the profound, terrible loneliness of those who must stand watch over it forever. This response is AI-generated, for reference only.